You're live. Great. Also live. Well, right, Archie? Just tight. We got a big list to get today. We have to catch up. So we have a big list today. Yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. Some of you I know, some of you I'm meeting for the first time. Oh, destruction. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Yes. You pull from this list and start shuffling through things. Good morning, hope everyone is well. Everyone's having to start the weekend. Well, I guess actually overseas are well into the weekend. That's true. For me, it's Saturday at 9 a.m. Just started. 5 people in here. Hello. Right. This is good. Okay. Got the list open. List of updates. One is very exciting. So we'll give it 4 minutes. For anyone who's going to join in the beginning, join. Okay, we've got the whole list up, so that's good. Rising. Hello, everybody. Hello. Couple minutes, and then we're going to list. You know how it is. I always go into it 5 minutes after the start time. This is like the conjugating time. Everyone gathered. Archimedes here. She's just, I think, asleep actually. You know, God forbid they be awake in the morning, like a half hour after the lights come on. You know, it's still sleep time. Fun time. Oh. Hello. What brand of coffee is that? You know, not actually sure. It is the morning blend again for single serve Keurigs. So it's like morning thing. So I have like toasted cinnamon bun and then French toast and bananas Foster and then like blueberry and cream oatmeal. So it's like a morning flavor variety pack. What's up? The morning flavor variety pack. It's quite good. Oh, how did I sleep on that fancy new bed? Now, that's a good question because we can look at the app. I slept better than in my old bed, but I didn't sleep perfect. But I was adjusting the firmness and everything. So my sleep score out of 100 was 69. And then this takes your heart rate and everything. Had good low heart rate, 60 something. So I can see I was sleeping good, and then I can see where I kind of became uncomfortable, woke up, adjusted the bed, and then slept through for that 5 hours. So it was good. I slept for basically 3 hours, made an adjustment, and then was out for 5. So that's good. So out of the whole 8-hour sleep time, the bed recorded me only 36 minutes that I was restless, moving around, trying to get comfortable. But again, I was messing with the firmness. That's good. Yeah. So I would say very well. It says I'm sleeping very good with a low heart rate. Yeah, very good. All right. You're also pretty quiet in the stream. Yeah, it's because I was mumbling. Let's see if we can fix that. Okay, I've turned up the microphone a little bit, so hopefully that helps. Mm-hmm. It's a slow morning for me. All right, it takes a little while. I got to get going here. Started this coffee late. Normally I'm halfway into it before the stream. That way I can get into this. All right, but let's get into the meat and veggies of a big update. Then we're gonna hit Then we're gonna hit some questions. But then if anyone who joined, they have questions, obviously. You guys are able to join and ask. Here's the big update, and this is a pretty big one. How are the cloned Parthenogenesis ball python eggs doing? So a little recap, even though anyone who knows. Tetra, right? My old female normal ball python laid eggs, never laid eggs before, never has been with a male snake before through the process which is named parthenogenesis, which is just a reptile cloning process that female reptiles are able to do, which allows them to get pregnant and give birth to clones of themselves without any male genes needed. It's different than retained sperm. This is no male genes ever. These are single gened animals that will all be XX, so will all be female based off of the mom. And it's an effort in nature, we believe, to keep the species alive. Although I always question, can you really keep them alive without ever having a male? Like, then you would just be hoping that this self-replicating female cloning process would always happen, which then could keep a species alive as all females. The problem is parthenogenesis is rare to occur. So let's start there. Not as rare as we thought it was, as we've been keeping more reptiles as pets, because in the wild, if you came upon eggs, how do you know if that was parthenogenesis? How do you know if there wasn't a male? Retained sperm can go for a handful of years. So you don't know in the wild, which is how we used to judge. Now, parthenogenesis can happen with eggs. It can also happen with live birth. So we used to think under a 1% chance. I think it's significantly higher, only because if you even look at YouTubers who have reptiles, you can see, it happens. It's not like a, miracle that happens. It happens more often than we used to think. But think about all the people who just don't have a YouTube channel that this is happening to, right? So now there's a downside that parthenogenesis babies normally don't survive, right? So these are single gene. They have no male genes, and therefore they are biologically typically pretty weak babies. They don't have the parts from the dad to fill in gaps in their DNA to make their cells strong. Even if you have a female animal, female reptile, it's still taking traits and genes from the dad when you do the breeding process. Okay. So now, two things. This typically happens two ways, though. So when parthenogenesis occurs and it's live birth, almost all the babies are good to go right after birth. They're alive, they're moving around. Sometimes they even start eating. But within the first really 3-month period, a deadfall. It just happens. All of a sudden, babies just start dying. Boom, 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 boom. Just kind of sad, to be honest. But yeah, they just die down, and that's with the live birth. Now, with the egg birth, basically the same thing occurs, but within the egg. So when parthenogenesis occurs, you'll get almost 100% full embryo-carrying eggs. Main structures, even in slugs you can get it, which is quite interesting because those have no chance of developing because the egg is smaller. I did not know that, but I guess it makes sense. Now, the drop-off and the death starts occurring with the embryo, the baby snake, inside of the egg. Yeah, so that's that drop-off that will occur. And they'll just die. They just won't continue to develop. And then the egg will die. So when you see your eggs molding, your eggs rotting, dimpling in, suctioning in, the embryo just didn't make it, which is unfortunate. So I had 8 eggs that looked viable with embryos in them. That slowly, randomly started dropping off and eggs started dying in the same environment. It's not, the first go around. I pretty much know what I'm doing, but this is a rare occurrence here. And because it was parthenogenesis, the getting anything to hatch would have been like, whoa, awesome. So ball python eggs typically pip out between 50 and 60 days. Typically. Sometimes a little sooner, sometimes a little later. Some people think it has to do with temperature, which is between 88 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit for that time period. If you think it's a little bit warmer, but not too much warmer, you can get them a little bit quicker. And if it's a little bit cooler, it might take a little bit longer. I'm at day 52. I have 2 eggs that are starting to dimple now, which now is the safe time for them to be dimpling because the snake should be absorbing the rest of the yolk in the egg, which should shrink the egg down. When I handle with a flashlight, obviously, and I look in the eggs, I do see a big veined network, and I'm unsure if there's a snake in there, if these are developing much slower. We're going to ride this out regardless. But basically, any time between now and day 60, so 8 more days, would be your time to happen. Now, people have asked, well, are you going to cut these ball python eggs? And why do people cut ball python eggs? Because ball python eggs are not cut in the wild. Does it help with survivability? Is it for this? Is it for that? And those are good questions. So I plan eventually, probably if we get past day 60 and I'm not seeing anything, to cut the eggs open. Now, when ball pythons and most egg snakes are developing, they have an egg tooth that is right in the front middle of their mouth. Very small, very sharp tooth. They don't keep this tooth, and that is to slice the inside of the egg open to help themselves get out of the egg. Pretty fascinating. The reason why egg cutting started to occur is, and this is probably due to mass breeding, I don't know what the usage is, but ball pythons sometimes do not have an egg tooth. It doesn't develop. It's a small egg tooth. The snake is stuck upside down. Sometimes there's twins in there, so it can't get in the right position to cut the egg. So the ball python baby, which now the yolk is gone, needs to start breathing air, and they would suffocate inside the egg. So what most people used to do was just cut a little slit that would get air in there, and then the baby snake would kind of figure out and help or get its way out. Now, this changed into, but you would do that after day 60. This kind of changed right into, near day 60 for most breeders to cut the eggs, because when the snake is still in there and you cut the egg, the snake is like really passive, right? And sometimes it still has a little bit of yolk. It still needs to be in the egg for another couple days, but now you remove the top of the egg. And this allows you to see the snake that's not moving, and then you can kind of figure out easier with the genes, what are they, document them, rather than you just have all of a sudden you wake up one day and you've got, 10 or 12 snakes and they're all moving over each other. And then also some breeders, if you buy snakes from them, they will actually keep the egg the physical snake or reptile came from. And this is really cool. And I think this is a great thing, especially if you have something, I was going to say if you have something that gets much larger than the egg, but even leopard gecko eggs that are about as big as your thumbnail, leopard gecko still gets significantly bigger than that egg. So I think the keeping of the egg, and when someone buys that reptile and they get the egg, it's kind of cool because 20 years down the line, you have this big lizard walked around and you're like, oh yeah, it came from this golf ball sized egg right here. Obviously, you can't do that for a live bird, so whatever. But maybe I'll have two, which again would be very rare. First of all, it would be very rare just to get really good eggs from a first-time mom. So this whole scenario is very rare. Maybe we'll have two babies. Those are the eggs that are, have done the best. And we'll see. Maybe we'll have nothing, but it was an event. And a lot of people always, especially on my Instagram, asking about those eggs. This is Archimedes, actually. Yeah, you can take photos too, obviously. I mean, you should take photos because your reptiles go from being small to big quite quickly. So let me get some of these questions because we actually have had some updates in the reptile world with studies and with new information and new graphics being made on what is considered to go on. So one of the biggest things is it has been kind of the general consensus has updated on reptile lifespans in captivity. This is a big deal, and it's something I wanted to hit, which is important. And again, I've kind of talked about this before, where the reptile lifespans are so stupid because they'll compare them to everything in the wild and as pets, and I really said there should be just a captivity study that's done, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of variables that come into that, proper care. So if I'm running a study and now all of a sudden I say, okay, everyone tell me how long your bearded dragons live, and I get a bunch of people that say 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, because they took crappy care, or they fed them once a week, or they didn't supplement, then that's going to be a big batch of people, right? And that's for any lizard that's just using bearded dragons because they're out there. And then other people are saying, oh yeah, mine live, 15, 16, 17 years. And these are the people who are taking good care. You're then going to clash these numbers together, and you're going to come in with a subpar at best life expectancy. And there's not going to be, the asterisk next to them that says, well, most of them that lived the shorter lives were bad housing, bad food, just bad care, right? No vet, blah, blah, blah. Egg binding, things like that actually killed them. That is a treatable condition that the people didn't do. And that's a problem because that factors into the lifespan. I'm looking at these. So, but I have the little chart here that was published, which is really nice. So, the way that they've tried to compensate for the study to compensate for those two numbers is to give a range, right? So when someone says, how long does that live? Very rarely do you say 20 years or 15 years or 12 years. No, you get a range, right? This to this. And that tries to compensate for variables. And then people think, okay, maybe my poor care will be down here, but my good care will be up here. Well, that's pretty bad as well, actually. And it's pretty uninformative. And it also can lead to a lot of confusion. So what they did is they looked at what they'll have called as the most popular common reptile pets. And so what they have listed are leopard geckos, yeah, bearded dragons, okay, horned snakes, all right, and tortoises. And it's very interesting because they just list tortoises, right? Whatever that means, right? Whatever. Very bad, very uninformative tortoises. Could be 500 species. Which, by the way, there should be a care because a sulcata lives drastically different than a Galapagos or an Aldabra, which lives different than a Russian tortoise or a cherry head, right, or a box turtle. So already, whatever. But okay, so for the tortoise, we're gonna hit on it real quick. We're just gonna make fun of them. But they basically went on the low end, and they said 50 plus years. Okay, so they're trying to cover the spread. Fine. But let's look at leopard gecko and remember the way that they're doing the scale to compensate because they don't ask for care. They're just asking how old is it currently, or if you had one, how long did it live? So leopard gecko, the new study now as a pet, so we're removing the wild, 10 to 20 years. What have we done there that's bad? 10 to 20 years. Could we have a longer gap? We've basically said the maximum predicted lifespan is double the minimum. I mean, you couldn't have a wider spread in terms of percentages, right? Because you're literally 100%. I mean, you could go higher, but then you really be called a psycho. You're 100% greater in there. So it's literally double. That's insane. That's the stupidest thing you could say. Because again, the study was done poorly. And look, I don't know how you do it better because how do you verify unless you do it yourself? So unless you get a wall of all these lizards and you take the exact same good care and medical need and here and there. So that's why you have that range. That's too big of a range. Now, and what I wanted to care for, though, is what I consider to be the most kept reptile and probably shouldn't be, the bearded dragon. So this is something that's had age lifespans all over the place, from as low as 2 years to as high as about 8 years. The average, what was formerly accepted, was 4 to 8 years as a pet. Now, this is one that started getting just destroyed because people started having bearded dragons that were living well over 8, well into their teens. Now, a lot of this was also brought down because the wild, where they're getting eaten as babies or dying within the first 2 years. That is very rare as a pet to have a 2-year death. You either got something that genetically was messed up or you did an extremely horrible job. Otherwise, they should make it at least 2 years. Easily. So the bearded dragon's captivity lifespan went from 4 to 8 years, and they basically flipped it. It's now 8 to 12 years, which is much greater than it used to be, but I still think it's too low. I believe it's too low. They should if they want to put it at 8, it should live well past 8 with good care. Minus some illness, the power goes out, they get sick, You know, complications can happen, egg binding, blah, blah, blah. But just living their lives, I would have felt a lot better if we would have put the minimum, if we would have said this chart should have been 10 to 15. That would have made me feel better. And also, I think people would have a more realistic look at what to do. Do I have any bearded dragons that are below 8 years of age right now? No, I think my youngest bearded dragon is about 9 or 10. I'd have to look at the exact ages. And my older ones are well into their mid to late teens. So that's not how you do a study, because you wouldn't just look at them online, right? You need to compare and averages and everything. But I think 8 to 12 is still too young for their lifespan. I don't know if you guys want to chime in on what you think. That's fine. If you have bearded dragons, how old are they? If they died, how old were they when they died? Now, the other thing that I found interesting, though, is that they chose to look at corn snakes over ball pythons. And I think that was probably an error, although they probably view ball pythons, most people who are keeping them. Yeah, okay, I probably understand why. Not thinking about it now. They probably know that a lot of people that keep ball pythons are breeding them rather than just standard care. And that is probably going to do something to affect the longevity, the lifespan. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just saying probably, but I can't assume. At least for the female, I would like to think that the body is being overworked. I don't know. But just being bred that often, right? Chain breeding and then chain laying eggs, and then being fed back up and then repeating the process. I would like to think that wears down the female snake, but I don't know. I've never looked at it, so maybe it doesn't shorten their lifespan. Maybe it increases it. I don't know, but I would think that it decreases it. So maybe they thought it would be hard for them to say, okay, who has ball pythons, and a lot of them, that was never breeding them. Oh, I only bred them for 5 years. Well, 5 years consecutive, or 10 years, then I stopped, or I stopped once the snake became this old. Very interesting. So they bring up corn snakes, and they put corn snakes at 15 to 20 years. We kind of have thought about 20, low 20s. We've seen people with their corn snakes that are been more vocal about it. So again, usage could be live longer. People aren't reporting it. People just have pets, right? So it's that's a pretty well accepted lifespan. 2 decades for a corn snake. It's a smaller snake. And maybe they were also afraid because, again, if you're doing ball pythons, now what happens when people start giving you ages like 50, 60, 70? And then on the high end, and then on the low end, you've got people who are giving you, it lived to be 1 or 2 or 3. And you're like, whoa. Could you imagine if they're like, a ball python should live between 10 and 60 years? What up? Remember I made fun of the other scope for the leopard gecko? Yeah, what a scope that would be. Naming at age 3, Murray age 7. With my female 3-year-old ball python. Okay. Cool. Yeah, right. So yes, if you look at Rose cancer, which could have been caused from follicles, could have been caused from this or that, right? Any reason. So we would say that that's a non-old death, and then your other ones would just go. It would be interesting, like Naaman with no back legs. Does she end up living longer because something is found, something which is good? 3-year-old ball python. Okay, drummer. I didn't know drummer had a first name. Enjoy a friend, another ball python. Very interesting, because most people who keep ball pythons, even keeping the same sex, do not put them in the same tank. People will say it causes stress, basking spot size, and competition, and then if they're both food aggressive, they could bite each other. So the common consensus for ball pythons is not to have them oust if anything else. It's just these snap and become a real problem. In the wild, snakes are very interesting because you'll see in Indonesia and all these places where there'll literally be caves filled with snakes living together. Filled. Now they're not ball pythons, I get that, but reticulated pythons filled living together, black-headed. So you'll see some snakes in the wild doing natural types of commingling, but typically in captivity, you don't have them do that just because it's just not. We're not set up. We're not set up, and we don't know long term. And then again, I'm sure snakes fight in the wild and kill themselves. But the biggest problem I would see with the snake, especially if you're using some type of underheat tank, think about that snake coils and it covers the whole under tank feeder. Now you've got a whole nother snake. How would they? Right, basking is a big problem with snakes because these snakes coil up and they now cover the whole basking area. And really, how could you fit a whole other snake on there? Put in. And you make a big enough hide with, right, so there's a reason why maybe it's happening in these giant sized caves, because you can get, just hundreds of warm spot areas. You have maybe multiple cave entrances. The entrance is ginormous, so your typical ball python hide with your little mouse hole opening. What happens if one snake's trying to come in and one snake's trying to come out? The logistics are not great for doing multiple snakes together. So people just say, outside of the accident, they might fight each other, especially when food is involved. We've seen snakes miss. Maybe they would strangle each other. Who knows? Maybe one ends up being male. Who knows? I think the bigger problem, though, is space. But people will say it stresses them out, even when you put two females together. Now, I don't know how we do that. The snake can't talk. I always question when we talk about animal stress levels, because how do we really, really know? Some people will say, oh, well, they act different. Okay, what's different? Well, they stop eating. All right, they also stop eating when they're not stressed, so that's not good. So I often wonder stress in animals. How do we measure it correctly? Oh, the bearded dragon gets black bearded. Okay, my bearded dragon gets black bearded when he's eating a ton of blueberries. I think it just fires him up. Definitely not stressed. Maybe he is stressed. Maybe he's stressed eating. I don't know. Sometimes he's sleeping, his beard is black. Sometimes he's outside, his beard is black. Sometimes he's in the bath, his beard is black. Sometimes he's eating his favorite food, the beard is black. So it's very difficult on how do we measure what we say is stressful in animals, not just reptiles, in animals in general. I go, oh, a dog does this. Okay, but I've seen dogs shaking their legs and acting with someone that's stressed when they're eating wet food. I don't know. Is that making them stressed, or do they maybe do things that we perceive as stressed? I think it's difficult. Now, I think if you have a pet, you know your pet, you can say, oh, I can tell when they're stressed. I hope so. But again, we're just telling by like some type of physical thing that they're doing, shaking, closing their eyes, cowering in fear, turning colors. But then they do that same reaction for something that's not stressing them. Good points. Okay. Let's go down. We're flying through. We're a half hour through. So that was on the lifespan. And you guys always get me on tangents, which I just thought was very interesting to see. And it was interesting to see that the average lifespans for captivity have gone up slightly for everything. Either the maximum age went up or the maximum age stayed the same, but the minimum age moved up. I still think it's wrong, but it's less wrong. You were only wrong in two places. This person was wrong in one. They're still both wrong, but it's less wrong. We have a new list on the most popular reptile pets for the USA based on sales in 2024. So I thought that this was interesting, and we had to talk about this. Hold on this here. So that's a big deal. What are people buying as pets now? Typically, this is perceived as what are the and I'll share it, but definitely based off this list, what are the easiest reptiles to keep? Also, what does PetSmart and Petco sell? Okay, that's how this list will be formed, and we'll see when we go into it. So people are going to look at these are easier, perhaps these are cheaper, and these are sold at the big box stores. So yes, you're definitely, don't be shocked. You're not going to see Cuban rock iguana on this list. Sorry, it just is not sold at Petco, PetSmart. It's more expensive. You're looking at $300 to $600 for a normal, one that's not proven breeder, that's not ginormous already, that's starting at, hatchling, and you're going to spend 20 years getting this thing to be 6 foot in length. So we're gonna look at this list based on sales. Now, you may think, what is number one? Number one is not bearded dragon. Sorry to tell everyone that, although I'm not sure. Good morning, Rachel. Number one are actually leopard geckos. I'm not too shocked by this because, again, looking at the store mentality, leopard geckos they definitely stay longer together in tanks, and there definitely are a lot of them inside the big pet stores. And when maybe as a family and you go into the pet store and you're like, oh, I'm going to buy a lizard. Okay, great. And what are the typical questions? How long do they live? The person's going to hit you with a leopard gecko, and they're saying up to 20 years. And then when you ask the bearded dragon, you're going to say, how long do they live? And they're saying, let's look at the new data, 12 years. Okay, so you've already got something that almost lives double. Okay, how expensive are they? Let's say normals. Let's say they're both on sale. The bearded dragon, $70. The leopard gecko, $20. Okay, cheaper. Remember, you're the parent. Longer life expectancy, cheaper. Well, how big do they get? Because the bearded, I'm gonna say a bearded dragon, can be about 2 feet, and a leopard gecko about 6, 7 inches. Oh, smaller. Smaller also means smaller tank. Smaller tank also means less money. What do they eat? I'm glad you asked. A bearded dragon is going to need a mixed diet between bugs and veggies and fruits. Small amounts of protein are fine as well. And if you have a female that lays eggs, meat is very important to get the protein up. You're going to be like, whoa. And then if, baths and watch the pores if it's male and blah, and you're going to be like, what the heck? Okay, what does the leopard gecko eat? Oh, I'm glad you asked. A leopard gecko should eat a diet that is just strictly bugs. Oh, really? Well, what about that huge berry diet that the bearded dragon? No. So again, you're the family. You're like, the leopard gecko is cheaper, lives longer. The lizard itself is cheaper, lives longer, smaller, which means smaller tank, which also means cheaper tank. Eats just bugs, so I can come to the pet store and buy crickets. I can get a cricket keeper. I can get roaches. I can do any of that. Really? Yeah. I think we'll get the leopard gecko. It's kind of a win argument, right? So number one purchased reptile in 2024 was the leopard gecko. Number two is the bearded dragon. Okay. Number three is the corn snake. Again, because of big box stores, right? It's very easy to see a corn snake on there. Number four is actually a ball python. And again, you can tell that these things are Petco and PetSmart driven. And then number five is blue tongue skink. Those are, by the way, those fives are great reptiles, and I'm happy people are coming in the hobby. Those are reptiles that will all go over a decade, and you'll have a really good pet. So it's really good. But I just thought that that was an interesting list to see if it changed so much from the COVID era when baby big lizards were selling like crazy from private breeders. Ball pythons were through the roof, and the other amounts were down. Maybe because of shipping, right? Of course. So people are not shipping baby leopard geckos and everything. They're small, they're fragile, they're going nuts. So that was a good list. Can you share with us what kind of enclosure a Chinese water dragon needs? Okay, so let's talk about Chinese water dragons. They are your person who wants a friendly, cool-looking lizard. So you don't want to put the effort of an iguana. You definitely don't want to put the effort of taming a green iguana because you're looking at years of effort. And you're looking at a really friendly lizard, male or female. Though they in the wild they go up to people for food. So Chinese water dragons are really cool animals. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, there's some downsides. They also do brumation. Yeah. So it is a lizard that can go away. They eat bugs, which is really nice. So you can have a good mixture if you got a lot of bugs to kill. Their enclosure is an iguana's enclosure plus more. Yeah, that's right. So they do like the humidity, they like the moist substrate. They actually like substrate because it helps keep that same amount of humidity in. Now you can do a clog and you can do this, but they actually also really enjoy and need and should have a swimming pool. Not a human-sized swimming pool, but in their enclosure, they need a pretty big-sized tub. It can be a cat litter box that they can get in, they can soak, but they do like to swim. So I've seen enclosures where, and they make some of these glass enclosures, by the way, where the bottom of the enclosure is waterproof, the whole thing, like, 5-6 inches. And people will just keep that full and then have platforms up on top, right? So then you have your top shelving like it would be in the wild. And then you can even have some type of log coming up out of the water. And then you can have a filter that runs in there and you just keep that full. You're definitely going to need a filter because, especially if the whole fixture down below is water, that thing's going to poop and climb and pee and it's all going to go in the water. And you need to keep that water clean. Not difficult to do with canister filters. You're just running 2 hoses, intake, output, boom, boom, that's fine. But yeah, you'll do it. But so if you get a nice long enclosure that even has 4 or 5 inches of water, that thing can swim laps back and forth. Even a 4-foot enclosure, it's really good for them as long as you have that bottom all be water. Now, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of ways you can waterproof, by the way. The enclosure doesn't come waterproof. You can lay a pool liner type, like shelf liner, pool liner, but basically a liner that you cut and you bring up so that, is now waterproof. Simple. So there's a lot of things that you can do, and it will use that water quite often, every day, every single day. Males get pretty big, nice big jowls, nice red neck, really cool looking. And they'll eat meat, they'll eat fish, they'll eat meat, they'll eat bugs. Friendly, smart lizards that do not get super, super big. They used to be called like your poor man's iguana, except the green iguanas are cheaper, $8 at a reptile show for a green iguana. But when you buy a green iguana, you're going to get something that is very large. It's got a big face, right? The face, if it's a male, like this big lizard mouth. And they're typically not friendly. Remember, green iguanas are what caused all the studies for neutering lizards to remove aggression. That was all based off of, they all did that to try to calm down male green iguanas. And it does mixed results, but they can calm down But most of the time, green iguanas will bond with their owner. So they will become very strongly bonded to the owner. And, almost like you're their mate. And they want to protect you and they want to cuddle with you and they don't like when they see that interacting with other ones. So you have some mixture. Now, for me, like I tell people, I really think the best type of thing you can get for a lizard is a lizard that starts off highly intelligent and will become super intelligent as it goes on. So, my top categories of lizards are good morning, Kelly. And this is not in an order because they all have pluses, they all have minuses. But so in no particular order, a rock monitor, and there's 3 species in there: black throat, white throat, savannah. A rock iguana, where there's multiple species in there: rhino, Cuban rock, Cayman brack, blue-side hybrid, right in there. And those are the 2. Or a snake, and then but particularly ball python, etc. Those are like your 3 categories if you're really looking to get something cool that is intelligent. Now, turtles and tortoises round up that list, but only because the keeping requirements are so much different than those. Tortoises are very smart; they will follow you, but you can get a tortoise that gets gigantic. And then how do people keep that? Right? And they can't get apathy. You need to walk them around. What if you have a crewmating tortoise? If you have a crewmating tortoise and you're not somewhere that gets cold weather and you don't have a basement, you're going to be in trouble. If you're someplace that gets cold weather and you have a crewmating, people will bury them in the backyard for 4 months. If you have a garage, people will let it sleep in the garage for 4 months. If it needs to get cold, it needs to experience winter temperatures. So those can be harder. Turtles, you're looking at some type of a pond or tank setup based on the turtle, and maybe you can put other turtles with it, but I'll tell you what you're not going to put. You're not going to put vegetation in there. You're not going to put other fish in there, except for when you want to feed them fish. So, you're looking at a big tank with just a turtle. That turtle will become very smart. That turtle will love you. That turtle will follow you. That turtle will learn its name. So you can't have the same interactions that you could with all the other things. There are other lizards I love. Asian water monitors, etc. These get big, so because of that, they're not my top 3, my personal top 3 that I recommend. But every time everyone's like, "Oh, I'm thinking of getting this." Now you'll notice one I didn't mention because it falls. It is the first one that falls right outside kind of the top category. Although I would put it ahead of turtle tortoise. That is the bearded dragon. And the reason why I don't put my bearded, or I don't put bearded dragons in the top, first of all, let me defend. I love bearded dragons. They make amazing reptile pets. Smart. They have an attitude. They learn. They're compassionate. They'll feel comfortable with you. You can move them around. The size is relatively small. The biggest reason why I don't put them in the very top is brumation. Brumation is a big problem. It happens randomly and for a random length of time, sometimes 6 months. So you could very well be buying a pet that you only get to see 6 months out of the year. Now sometimes it's shorter. Let's say you get to see it 8 months, 9 months. Now that could work towards your advantage, and I have friends who have bearded dragons, and they schedule going on vacation during brumation time. So, but for me, the brumation is something that kind of sucks, and then you don't have your pet for potentially half the year. And then if you're looking for a lizard, that you can just have free walk around the house, can climb up on the furniture, can climb into bed, can sleep outside, a bearded dragon stays too small for that. You don't want to be in bed and roll over on your bearded dragon, right? Now, when you're in bed with The rock monitors or the rock iguanas, you more worry about them coming onto you because then you get too hot. So those are, you know, you can go outside and you don't have to worry about a hawk coming and picking up your 12, 13, 14, 15 pound monitor lizard, you know, your 30-pound rock iguana. It's not happening. That's, you know, 6.5 feet in size. So you have to think about those things, but tank size is a big deal. But yes, I would rather have a savanna monitor over a bearded dragon. The tank has to be larger, absolutely. But still, even if I'm keeping it as a pet that I don't have my sleep in my bed, but I like to pet and interact with and feed, that's easier for me. Yay. For me, but that's why so bearded dragons fall in the category just outside the top 3. But if you have a spot for a tortoise and a turtle, if you're someplace that's hot all year round, dude, a tortoise is so awesome. Especially one that eventually gets big. They are so intelligent. Especially when you look at like the Galapagos turtles on the island or the tortoises hunting birds. People will be like, what do you mean hunting birds? It's quite fascinating, actually. And we have them on video. They will dig a little hole with one of their feet to expose worms and bugs, and then they will stand on 3 legs for hours and not move. They make a deadfall trap, and with one leg up in the air above where the worms are, and stand there for hours on 3 legs with that one leg up. The bird will see the bugs. The turtle hasn't moved, it thinks it's a rock. They will come down, the bird will start to eat the bugs that are exposed, and wham! Instantly, they slam their foot down, crushing the bird. And then they eat the bird. It's pretty fascinating. Very, very fascinating. They're making their own booby trap. And so sometimes we don't realize how smart reptiles can actually become, which is unfortunate. But also because we didn't really study them as pets often, and the intelligence is quite nice. You know, like no offense, but I like to bring people into the matter. Someone who just was, you know, I don't want to say homeless, but just someone who you just find in the woods, who's lived in the woods their whole life, because, you know, people typically are not. But let's just say you're born in the woods and you grew up on your own, and then you come into society, and now you're competing against someone who, you know, has been Ivy League educated, and then they're like, okay, here's a math test for both of you. The person's gonna be like, what is this? The other person's gonna fly through it, and it's kind of the same thing. So, not saying that reptiles who are in the wild don't have skills, because that's why I brought up the tortoise, but as captivity, because they have a teacher, we are able to help them to unlock their potentials like that. And then just coincidentally, the larger lizards, I think because of the larger brain, can unlock more things. Now, look, you see videos all the time of people call their bearded dragon and they tap the floor because they've got a treat. And the bearded dragon knows that, oh, that means treat. He comes running from the other side of the house. Absolutely doable. They just fall just on the outside for me. And then just on the outside of them, I put chameleons. And the only reason that I don't put chameleons higher up is they're very fragile. So if you have kids, but man, chameleons are so cool because you don't have to worry about getting bit and things like that. But they're fragile, they're slow moving, and so a lot of times they can do it. And unless you get a veiled chameleon or you spend money for a Parsons or a Meller's chameleon, they got short lives. Even and I tell people, like, even a veiled chameleon, like 8 to 12 years, it's not a lot of time. People will be like, hey, man, that's almost a decade. Yeah, but you have to remember that this is something that first you're going to tend 2 to 3 years to get to an adult, okay? So now, remember, let's look at 8 years. Now you're 3, so now you got a 5-year gap. Now you're going to start training it to do cool stuff, and they do it. Now, all of a sudden, you're 5 years old, and now it can do all that. And now, look, now you have 3 years of when it's an adult and been trained. And if you try to tell me 3 years is a long amount of time to have a buddy like that, and then they're gone. And that's the problem with chameleons is once you get all that stuff unlocked, now you have a short, they're just near the peak of their life, unless you spend thousands to get a 2-decade living Parsons chameleon. But then that also gets very big. So but it also depends on what your goal is. If you're just looking to have a pet that's like a visual, and you want a chameleon and they're cool, that's great. Because I love chameleons. And you just have to be careful with the kids, they're fragile. I had a coworker say, ew, when I told her I had a yes. I wonder if that same coworker that said ew really knew what a chameleon was and also thinks that a chameleon can change to just any color in the rainbow whenever they want. Because I would have some people say ew after I tell them I have this type of lizard. First they say ew, and then they ask me what is that? Well, how did you react with ew if you are admitting you don't even have a clue on what it is? All right? Okay. She is also scared of worms. Right. Just like scared or disgusted. Like if I just like, look, there's a worm outside on the grass, would she be like the elephant and the mouse where she just takes off running in the opposite direction? That would be fascinating. And all reptiles, just everything. Just everything in general. That's good. Okay, so we've pretty much been here for like an hour. I went over my pieces. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask? Otherwise, we're gonna wrap this up and we're gonna get on to our weekend. This was good though. This was like a live stream. And guys, I know this didn't take place the last Saturday because the last Saturday was Labor Day weekend and I was available. I just thought it was fun. Yeah, it is interesting, the ill, because like what about them is ill? Like maybe you don't like them, but what is like the ill? But a lot of people think all reptiles are slimy, right? Snakes are slimy. Everyone is, every reptile is slimy and wet. And I guess they don't understand like where like snakeskin boots and snakeskin wallets come from, and it's just leather. Double Dragon Hotel, thanks for being you $20. Thank you for being you. How about I say that? And in fact, like I told you, we have for my IT job, one of our clients is a leather company, big leather distributor. And on the wall in their building is like a giant python skin that's, played out. That's just mounted up on the wall for looks. Wow. Okay. Looks good. We haven't had time. All right, guys. I'm going to go. Take care. Thanks so much for coming into this stream. You're going to get 2 streams this month because of the Labor Day and the one at the end. So take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.